In The 40-Year-Old Virgin, a 2004 comedy directed by Judd Apatow, Steve Carell is a clerk working at an electronics store who tries to hide from his colleagues the fact that he has never slept with a woman. What does a 40-year-old virgin look like in 21st century Los Angeles? Well, he cannot drive a car, he rides a bike with a helmet, and is a geek who collects some kind of small figurines from comic books or TV shows from the 80s. But what will betray his miserable condition, at least to the eyes of his colleagues of both sex, is the way he talks about his sexual experiences. During a poker game, he is urged by his friends to tell a real sex story to help one of them to forget about a former beloved. So many stories are running through my head right now, he says at first. And when he's asked for more specific details, he awkwardly resorts to linguistic stereotypes and cliches about a nymphomaniac partner. And he ends his description with a strange metaphor by comparing his fictional lover's breasts to a bag of sound. A bag of sound, after a brief moment, is unmasked by his fellows, who have never heard such an inappropriate image to describe the touch-sensitive experience of a female body. It seems as if male virginity lacks not only the experience of sexual intercourse, but also, and perhaps above all, the inability to choose the appropriate words and images with which to describe it. In late antiquity, virginity is a hot topic, as you know, and Greek novel is no exception. 5 novels have survived in complete form. I mean, the chronology is still very dubious, but you have an idea, you will have a general idea of it. Each of them, with some idiosyncratic features, is a heterosexual romance, culminating in either the marriage of the two lovers, or, if they were married already, their reunion. They deal with separations, trials, ordeals, aggressions of suitors of both sex, in an imaginary world where real history only incidentally bursts in. For a long time, these novels have been read as illustrating a new ethics, which celebrates chastity and self-restraint, where male and female characters defend the same ideal of reciprocal love and union. Some of you know very well this text, of course, but this is a reminder. Michel Foucault dedicated few pages to the Greek novels in a short chapter of The Care of the Self. Foucault saw in these works a contribution to the construction of a new eroticism, arguing that if love and sexual abstention coincide during the entire adventure, one has to understand that it is not simply a question of defending oneself against outsiders. This preservation of virginity holds within the love relation as well. The lovers save themselves for each other until the time when love and virginity find their fulfillment in marriage. So that premarital chastity, which brings the two fiancés together in spirit, so long as they are separated and being put to the test by others, keeps them self-restrained and makes them abstain when they are finally reunited after many twists of fate. In the last 2 volumes of its History of Sexuality, Foucault insists on the protocols and techniques of self-control to justify the rise of sexual asceticism during the 1st century CE. And he introduces Greek novels, and especially the novels where the adventures and misfortunes come after the discovery of love and before marriage, as a paradigmatic ideal where this virginity is not simply an abstention resulting from a pledge, it is a choice of lives. This fruitful but orthodox approach has been ably nuanced in different ways, especially because Foucault was focusing on normative discourses without noticing the witty and subtle contestations by the novelists of this edificatory project. Simon Goldhill, for example, has rightly stressed that it is not that Foucault's panoptic vision of ancient sexuality ignores much of the fun that is had with the knowledge and teaching of sexuality and desire in ancient erotic fiction, but also, and perhaps more importantly, that his avoidance of the intricate dynamics of reading erotic narrative leaves a fundamentally distorting gap in his writing of the history of the discourse of desire. Foucault's project of locating the normative cannot hope to avoid the complexities of the strategies of engagement, which are produced by the sort of ironic commentary on teaching desire and its mastery that the novel offers. And he adds, as the novel plays a role in the construction of a symmetrical and monogamous chastity as an ideal, so it plays with the roles such an ideal enforces. In other words, the Greek novel is a highly unstable genre which defies essentialist moral readings and problematizes a set of sexual attitudes, particularly towards male virginity, which I would like now to focus on. If we are to investigate, at least partly, the protocols of male virginity in the Greek novel, we must begin by noting that there is a significant distinction to be made in a corpus which is not so homogeneous. The distinction between the pre-sophistic novels and their sophistic counterparts works at different levels. But in the dynamics of erotic narratives, there is a major break that instantaneously delineates the boundaries between the two groups. In Chariton and Xenophon of Ephesus, the two main characters fall in love on first sight, endure the burning wants of desire and love, and then suffer some unidentified sickness before the correct diagnostic set them free and led them on the path to marriage, much to the delight of their fellow citizens in Syracuse and Ephesus. It takes only a few pages in these two novels before Callirrhoe and Chaereas and Anthea and Abrocomes fulfill their union in a mutual embrace that perfectly echoes the sexual symmetry nicely articulated by David Constant in his classical study. While Chariton and Xenophon are not as generous as the other novelists in terms of erotic tension and voyeuristic pleasure, at least they provide a quick and basic vision of the thalamus of the two lovers during the wedding night. In Callirrhoe, the narrator reveals the pregnancy of the heroine who is separated from her beloved Chaereas and stuck in Miletus, where Dionysius, the Pepaidomenos to whom she has been sold as a slave, has fallen in love with her. Fortune led a plot against Callirrhoe's loyalty to her husband. After Chaereas and Callirrhoe were married, their first contact was passionate. They had an equal impulse to each other, and matching desire had made their union fruitful. Xenophon, who has suffered for a long time from the highly questionable reputation of being a poor imitator of Chariton, is for once more inspired than his model. They relax in each other's arms and enjoy the first fruits of Aphrodite, and there was ardent rivalry all night long, each trying to prove they love the other more. As you can see, an absolute and perfect sexual symmetry highlights the consummation of both wedding nights, where the two lovers try twice as hard as possible to compete in their erotic struggle to outdo the other. In Longus, Achillostatius, and Heliodorus, there is no marriage at the beginning of the novel. And in the case of Achillostatius, Michael was mentioning in his paper, there is no mention at all of any marriage between the two lovers. In a lecture on sensuality in the ancient novel at UCLA a few years ago in 2018, Julia rightly reminded us that female virginity in Greek novel, if not complete chastity, is preserved until the genital and conjugal denouement. Defloration within marriage is the end of the story. I fully accept the truth of this observation, but if I may, I would add that while the genital denouement is presumed to be the end of the story, it is not exactly the end of the narrative. Because, at least in the case of Leucippe and Clitophon, and Chariclea and Theagenes, the sexual consummation belongs to an extratextual world. Longus is a borderline case, because as we can see in the self-referential Sphragies with which the text ends, he almost slams the door of the thalamus in his reader's face, a very frustrated reader, one might add, who has had to tolerate 4 books of the unbearable sexual incompetence of Daphnis and Chloe. In Disclosure, this is a text 3 on the screen. So in Disclosure, the novelist only concedes some euphemistic and enigmatic signs of their union. Daphne did some of the things of what Lycaonian told him, and it was then that Chloe learned for the first time that the things I had done earlier in the woods were merely games that shepherds play. But with the relocation of the marriage from the beginning to the end of the narrative, the novel's new mission aims not simply to restore a prior state of affairs, as in Chariton and Xenophon, but to transform the identities of the couple, or at least the sexual changes of some male protagonists. And since the marriage cannot happen before the very end of the text, when it happens, the avoidance by the protagonists, whether deliberately or not, of any sexual relationship before the marriage, frames the entire structure of these novels, though with different results in each one of them. This avoidance of any sexual relationship will constitute my definition, a rather restrictive and negative one, I must confess, but of virginity in the Greek novels. But virginity is, after all, always defined by the ancient Greeks themselves as a negative condition, and I quote Julia here again, while, as it is stressed by Michel Foucault in the Confessions of the Flesh, from Tertullian to Methodius, virginity continence became a positive state of virginity, and from continence to virginity, a negative and general recommendation is turned into a positive and particular experience. In Longus and Achillostatius, Daphnis and Chloe and Clitophon do have some sexual intercourse with women other than their beloved. And we have to acknowledge that constancy, which is at the moral center of the Greek novel, is not strictly reducible to the preservation of physical chastity or sophrosune, at least for these two male protagonists. Anyway, the hypothesis I would like to discuss now is the following. If male virginity is to be equated with a celebration of sensuality and extraconjugal sexuality with economics and exchange, then we may assume that male virginity in the Greek novel should be understood in the sense that Clitophon understands it when he proudly claims at the end of his picaresque adventures, and this is the same quotation as Michael, if one can speak of such a thing as male virginity, this has been my relationship to Alekippe up to now. In Daphnis and Chloe, the characters grow up together in a setting full of innocence on the idyllic island of Lesbos. But they are unconventional lovers, as they are perfectly unaware of what love is. They do not know how to name or recognize it, or eventually how to satisfy it. They have no experience of either virginity or sexuality, or of the process that allows the transition from the one to the other. But they experiment with what they have at their disposal, the body and the senses. The first erotic impulse, as this is the first text, is managed by contact through the eyes, the lips, and the skin, because, to quote Julia, desire aims at touching, kissing, caressing in a mutual exchange of sensuality. As John Wickler has noticed in his chapter about hidden injuries of sex in Longus, Chloe is ahead of Daphnis in experiencing the mysterious and painful stirrings of Eros when she watches him at the bath and washes his back. And this is the first text. This female gaze and touch denote the first signs of love, and Chloe is confused by this phenomenological experience. She objectifies Daphnis through her gaze, then tests the softness of her own skin against his. This juxtaposition and conflation of sight and touch are a common feature of late antique haptic and visual debates inherited from Plato and Aristotle, of course. In Chloe's case, instead of achieving self-knowledge and the awareness of erotic feelings, she fails to relate the essential signs to something she has already experienced. This is the beginning of love, and the young girl has no idea what is happening to her. The second chapter of this book of love is written when Daphnis is kissed by Chloe, after he has won a competition with a shepherd Dorco, for which the winner's prize is a kiss. And this is the text 2. Daphnis reacts to Chloe's untutored and artless kiss, just as she has reacted to the bath, the gaze, and the touch. Both lovers believe that they are suffering from some unknown disease. The next step will be to transform this bitterness in repetition, as underlined by Pauline at the end of each text here, and pleasure, although they are still unaware of the final stage of this experience and of how to reach it. In the third text on the screen, clearly, reciprocal sensuality has simultaneously reached a climax and its limits. Peras, with the word peras, which has the both meanings of climax and limit, actually. And the lovers have arrived at a crossroad where sensuality, that is touching through kiss and embrace, and virginity, which is a lack and or deprivation of sexual intercourse, meet and merge. The two lovers are untutored and artless because there is no cultural sign they could refer to. They have no books, no paintings to teach them. Euripides Hippolytus, perhaps the most famous male character in antiquity to practice sexual ascesis, and who claims to have a parthenos psyche, a maiden soul, is conscious of what he renounces when he declares, "I am a virgin to this very day. Save what I have heard or what I have seen in pictures, I am ignorant of the deed." Hippolytus, however, has heard of sex. He has seen explicit pictures of it. All that Daphnis and Chloe have been able to see is the rutting of goats and rams. But what is remarkable is that even though they are outside the conventional patterns of seduction and courtship, Daphnis and Chloe can reinvent some of this on their own. And this is the text 4. At a dinner at Chloe's parents', they exchange a kiss via a drinking cup, which is an important feature of erotic literature, especially the Latin elegy. In a novel that questions the protocols of erotic knowledge and the moral values of sexual ingenuity, Chloe acts in all ignorance like an accomplished flirt, and I quote John Winkler here, valorizing as natural the conventions of literature. In Longus, experiencing virginity without naming it is experiencing delay and sensuality to the highest degree through gazing, touching, embracing, and kissing, because sexual intercourse means something else, as we shall see a little later. The two virgins practice erotic seduction and play erotic games without cultural assistance, whether visual or linguistic. And while nature provides them with some models of sexual conduct, there is no sensual activity in the animal kingdom, no pleasure or suffering in the prolonged moment of procrastination before arriving at the final destination. Achillostatus, Leucippe, and Clitophon is an anti-Daphnis and Chloe. Daphnis and Chloe was a fiction of innocence. Leucippe and Clitophon, the only first-person narrative in the Greek novel, is a fiction of impotent knowledge. Daphnis is eager to have sex with Chloe, but feels desperate because he cannot fill the gap between sensuality and sexuality. He cannot take advantage of Chloe's willingness after kissing and embracing her because he is more foolish than rams in making love. On the exact opposite side, his counterpart, Clitophon, knows, at least theoretically, exactly what to do after the kisses and embraces and how to take advantage of them. He lives in Tyre, in a city and a house saturated with visual signs of erotic experiences, including a lot of praeceptores amoris, readily available to give him the benefit of their knowledge. With Clitophon, we are dealing with a lover straight out of a Tyrian declamation school with the produce of a sophistic academy whose resources he has committed to the service of love and seduction. And I quote here Graham Anderson. Nevertheless, that does not prevent him from introducing himself as a complete neophyte in sex when he claims that he has no experience in the mysteries of love since he has had sex only with prostitutes. And this is the first text. I'm only a novice, protopeiros, in my experience of women, and that has been restricted to commercial transaction with women of the street, Thyssen, Aphrodites, Polumenis, so prostitutes. Some commentators have stressed that Clitophon similarly tries to underplay his sexual experience in other occasions, so he demonstrates a very impressive cultural knowledge of eroticism. He learns from his cousin Clinias, who prefers boys but nonetheless dispenses variable heterosexual lessons, that a mutual gaze between two lovers can form a bodily union. And this is a text 2. The language used by Clinias in this text clearly parallels that found in Plato's Phaedrus, namely in his discussion of eros and vision. But the patristic texts also focus on the mixing between the sing scene and the eyes, pointing out, like John Chrysostom, the risk of slipping into a sexual gaze. As John Chrysostom says, you carry out the sinful deed, if not through intercourse, diates mixeos, then through the eyes. And as you can see, so Clinias presents the mutual gaze and a kind of copulation at a distance, tina mixin and apostasy. This is not far removed from the intercourse of body. It is, in fact, a novel kind of form of intimate embrace. Clitophon also learns from Clinias that it is necessary to secure a woman's consent through words before kissing her. Practice then follows theory, and this is the text 3. Clitophon pretends to have been stung by a bee, and he asks Leucippe to chant some Egyptian spells she knows to cure the pain. He turns the spell into light and delicate kisses, with an extreme care devoted to the texture of the lips, and with the apparent consent of Leucippe, who appears to be perfectly aware of the innuendos Clitophon is making. The kiss is a symbolic age. The foremost sweetness, as Clitophon acknowledges when he says at the first of this text, at the end of this text, sorry, that for sheer pleasure, pros edonen, nothing can compete with a lover's kiss. When Charmides, one of Leucippe's suitors, tries to seduce her, he admits not having sex with a girl as long as he can get a kiss from her. When Menelaus, a Clitophon's friend, tells Clitophon of Charmides' attempt, Clitophon complains that a kiss from Leucippe would be more intolerable for him than anything else, because what is sweeter than a kiss? With Aphrodite's act comes satiation and culmination, but it is reduced to nothing if you take away the kisses from it. Believe me, Menelaus, in this time of emergency, I am about to divulge secret mysteries when I say that two have nothing but kisses from Leucippe. She remains a virgin, etimene parthenos. My kisses alone have made a woman of her. Kissing is better than sex. Gazing is better than sex. They are a promise of infinite pleasure, longer and richer than the deed itself. In both sensual experiences, the message is the same, as Hélène Morales nicely sums it up. To be in a state of yearning is far preferable to reaching a climax. And if Leucippe is still a virgin, kissing is what makes a loved parthenos, a gune. This discovery, because it is a discovery for Clitophon, echoes the astonishing description of the orgasmic pleasure experienced by a woman uttered by Clitophon during a debate with his friend Menelaus on the comparative merits of homosexual and heterosexual love. This is the first text on the screen. Hélène Morales subtly points out that this description gives us an insight unparalleled in ancient literature, not only into woman's pleasure in the sexual act, but also into what is normally obscured by euphemism in the closing scenes of novels, where the couple finally make love. I would totally agree there if there were indeed any such things as closing scenes of sexual intercourse between the two lovers. In Greek novels, however, with a very euphemistic exception of Longus, there is not. Second, the sexual act here, explicit so it is extraordinarily metaphorized through the action of lips. Lips are happily here substitute for genital organs, as if the pleasure of mutual kissing could not only compete with penetration, but also exceed it. Clitophon contends here with Ovid in promoting the merit of mutual orgasm, and, as expected, is blamed in return by Menelaus for pretending he is not experienced in the need. So at the end of the text, Menelaus replied, "You seem less like a novice, protopeiros, and more like an old, a very old pro-Aphrodite's business, bombarding us with all these fancy refinements devised by women." In contrast to our 40-year-old virgin in Judd Apatow's movie, who tries to hide his condition from his fellows, but fails ultimately by using a wholly inappropriate metaphor, Clitophon claims he is still inexperienced in the mystery of love, but fails to convince his audience by exhibiting masterful skills in capturing metaphorical sex. This misunderstanding probably does not come only from a variation on the unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, rhetorical topos, as has been suggested. What Clitophon knows about the deed comes not from practice, but from theory. Clitophon is indeed a viewer and a reader. After a very bad night, dreaming of Leucippe, he starts to walk around the house the day after, peeping at the young girl while he is reading a book. And this is a text 2. I would like to think that there is a reference here to an erotic handbook, perhaps an Ovidian elegy, like I have tried to demonstrate elsewhere. Clitophon is a reader, but is no more than a reader. He knows a lot, and perhaps too much of eroticism, but he will be systematically and comically prevented from satisfying his desires with Leucippe throughout the narrative, because of Leucippe's mother's sudden intrusion, prophetic dreams, and so on. To indicate evidence of male virginity, Achillostatius made an opposite choice to the one chosen by Longus, but with similar consequences. While the latter pushes the ignorance of sexual achievement to the extreme, the former mocks an excess of bookish knowledge, since Clitophon's cultural disposition are anything but helpful in his sexual quest. But both authors finally celebrate, far more than penetration, the bitter pleasure of perpetual sensual longing for the beloved. Daphnis and Chloe challenge here the entire warrior of the Ovidian elegy, who, according to Julia in Sex and Sensuality in the Ancient World, creates the character type for the discreet, patient, and yearning lover who has to excel in procrastination and the postponement of pleasure. Of course, Daphnis and Chloe are yearning for something more than a kiss and embrace. They suffer, they endure. But what if there was nothing more after all than a kiss and an embrace, than the bittersweet but sensual comedy of delay? Let's now turn to the crucial passages where Daphnis and Chloe test out the uncommon experience in the Greek novel of sexual penetration outside marriage, an experience that Michel Foucault designated in the case of Clitophon as a minor honorable lapse. In Daphnis and Chloe, the little she-wolf Lycaonian, a woman from the city, has been observing Daphnis and Chloe for a while. It does not take her long to realize that something was going wrong with these two beginners. She then decides to seize a double opportunity to deliver the two lovers from their trouble by instructing Daphnis, and to satisfy her own desire by making love with a young shepherd. Acting like the predator she is, she literally buys his favors and virginity. And this is the text 1. she desired to entice Deleasasa him with gifts and take him as a lover, erasten ktesastai. On one occasion, she ambushed Lokesasa him when he was alone and gave him as a gift a set of pipes, a one in the comb, and a deerskin bag. It is worth noting that Lycaonian's name hints at sexual immorality. Lyca and Lycaina are well-attested prostitute names, and we have a Lycaenis in a Greek epigram who is a repulsive whore. Before Lycaonian made her move on Daphnis, the coward Dorcon, who embodies another sexual trait in the narrative, has been overwhelmed by his desire to make love to Chloe. The Greek text says exactly that he had been struck by a desire, erotikos dietete, for Chloe. An expression borrowed from a passage from Diotima's speech in the Symposium and applied to the sexual urges of animals. No sensuality here, no love, not even love, only the brutal desire of penetration. His pastoral offerings to Chloe suggest an intent to secure Chloe's consent and to rob her of her virginity. They clearly echo the ones offered by Lycaonian, who introduces herself to Daphnis as a praeceptor amoris, as underlined by the overemphasis put on the erotodidactic lexicon in the passage. And this is the text 2. So as you can see, they told me how you cried yesterday, and they told me to save you by teaching you how to make love. Didaxamenta erotos erga. Love is not kisses and embraces, and what rams and egots do. And come, give yourself to me as my student. I will teach you your lessons, didaxo, and oblige those names. In this passage, Lycaonian reveals to Daphnis that love is not kisses, is not embraces. Sexuality is not sensuality. But neither is it what rams and egots do. Human sexuality is not the sexual urges of animals. It is something else. Sexuality is a process where there is something to exchange, but not necessarily a mutual pleasure. What is the nature of her lesson to the young man? As Froma Zeitling points out, I think that Froma is with us, the scene of Lycaonian's education of Daphnis into the mechanics of sex is far more blunt and more literal a lesson between pupil and teacher than the sweet promise of an erotic didactic work might have implied. And indeed, that was the promise of Lycaonian. But do you really need techne to get that, or to find the right way? While the techne is the self-acclaimed lector of the novel, while it is still active at the climax of this initiation through the adverb enteknos, as you can see, and skillfully enteknos gededen. While nature was mocked because of its inability to teach Daphnis and Chloe to make love, at the end, nature has the last word and is the ultimate teacher. Epithumia, basic sexual needs, informs Lycaonian's prosaic didacticism. There is no such thing as seduction, games, touch, bodily exploration, and bittersweet delay. Daphnis has received a gift for the price of his favors and a lesson, and in return, he pays Lycaonian with his virginity. But he does not understand the meaning of the exchange. Later, when Lycaonian speaks about her lesson, she makes it clear that Daphnis' initiation, like hers, relies on a transaction, something that was already visible in the verb ktesastai in the first passage. And this is the text 4. You still learn to learn something, Daphnis. I happen to be a woman, and I haven't suffered any hurt now because a long time ago, man taught me this lesson and took my virginity as his payment. Miston ten partenian labor. But remember that I made you a man before Chloe. A virginity as a mistos for a lesson, and a lesson that is, in fact, finally given by nature. Sexuality is transactions here. Sexuality is economics. Besides, Lycaonian warns Daphnis how Chloe's defloration will be much more painful than his, how she will cry and weep and lie in a pool of blood. And that's a reference perhaps of the passages Julia was referring to about this pool of blood when Chloe will be deflowered by Daphnis. A warning which will delay the consummation of their love until the final paragraph of the novel. Who really want to have sex after such a rudimentary, disappointing, and even terrifying lesson? There is nothing special or exotic, xenon, in sexuality that occurs not only in Longus, but in the whole Greek novels. She did nothing exotic, says text, Xenon. In the conclusion of Daphnis and Chloe, the two lovers, who have integrated the social conventions underlying marriage, say farewell to their pagnia, their virginal games, because there are no more games needed in conjugal intercourse. We are now in Alexandria, very far from the idyllic Lesbos, but there is another Lycaonian waiting, hidden away in the streets. Clitophon is desperate because he believes that his beloved Cleochippe has been beheaded by a pirate on a boat. Actually, the woman beheaded was a prostitute. In Alexandria, he meets a matron named Melite. She is beautiful and she is rich. She lives in Ephesus, like Petronius' matron in the Satyricon, and like Petronius' matron, she is a happy widow. Furthermore, like Lycaonian, she is an experienced Gune, not a Parthenos. She falls in love with Clitophon, and Satyros, Clitophon's servant, urges his master to turn the present situation to his advantage by taking pity upon a soul that is aflame for him. Clitophon first constantly declines her sexual advances and encourages her to be wise and calm, since he cannot forget Leucippe. Melite introduces herself as another erotodidaskalos, and like Lycaonian, she does not really care about the pleasures of procrastination. What she wants is clear and will suffer no delay. Clitophon and Melite get eventually married, and ironically, but in accordance with the convention of the novel, Clitophon is the one who delays the sexual consummation of the marriage. He declines to make love to Melite on a ship, bringing them back to Ephesus from Alexandria, because there is something dreadful about having sex on a boat. And this is the text 1. It could be dangerous, he says, not to respect the sanctity of the sea. He tries to calm the inflamed Leucippe and advocates a sexual ascesis through a chaste pleasure, kataranten edonen, an undefiled pleasure. All that Clitophon has to offer is not, however, enough for Melite. Once they are back in Ephesus, Clitophon still manages to postpone the deed, but for Melite there is no pleasure in the delay. Meanwhile, Leucippe, who has been sold by the pirates to Melite, congratulates her new mistress on her wedding. Melite, who is unaware of Leucippe's identity, complains of Clitophon's refusal to consummate their marriage. And she compares Clitophon to a stone or a statue. This is the text 2, a comparison that suggests the coldness of her beloved and the impossibility to reciprocal relations, the only sensual satisfaction she derives from Clitophon coming from her own eyes and her gaze. I get no more than ocular satisfaction from my beloved. We soon discover that Tersander, Melite's husband, has survived his shipwreck and is in fact alive. A master of paradoxical issues, Achillostatus puts Clitophon in jail for adultery, whereas he has had no sex at all, with Melite. But while he is awaiting trial, he gives in and finally consents to have sex with her. As Melite asks for a medicine for her soul, the reader witnesses a second minor lapse of the big five. The way Clitophon, the ego narrator, remember, describes the action is a marvelous piece of writing, as it is said by Simon Goldie, full of self-justification. His sexual contact with Melite is conceived as a one-off He's offering a remedy, a pharmacon, to the lady, and at the end, he will get rid of her. Penetration happens. There was nothing special in Daphne's defloration. The pleasure of this casualness is natural and simple for Clitophon. Everything happened as love willed. The casual, to appear ergon in sex, is far more sweet than the carefully prepared. Its pleasure springs up like an intended plant. The sensuality is mentioned here, of course. When she embraced me, Peribalou says, I did not hold back in a comment. When our lips drew close, I did not refuse the touch, hook on telegon. So the sensuality is mentioned, but reluctantly, and with no excess or mutual pleasure in appearance, apparently at least. Of course, there is something of an ironical self-construction of the virgin Clitophon, who seems to enjoy his time with Melite before innocently claiming to Lequipe's father that he has preserved his virginity towards and only towards Lequipe. And this is the text 4. We have acted like sage philosophers. If there be such a thing as virginity in a man, etis ara estin andros partenia, I have retained it up to the present day as far as Lequipe is concerned. But our story does not end here. After the deed, Melite helps Clitophon to escape, takes his clothes, and gives him hers in return so that he might flee from her dangerous husband in disguise. She also offers him 100 gold pieces. As in the episode with Lycaonion, male defloration is associated with economics and exchange, but there is perhaps another more appropriate parallel. There exists indeed some suggestive similarities between this episode and the transaction that takes place in a passage from Lollianor's Phoenicia. The Phoenicia is a novel related to the subgroup of criminal satiric fiction we know only through fascinating fragments which describe cannibalism, masquerade, human sacrifice, and a deflowering. In one of these fragments, there is an account of the celebration of a festival or party, perhaps the Adonia, during which a nameless narrator loses his virginity with a woman named Persis. Persis is apparently a woman of the world, if not a courtesan, comparable in status to Melite. She has a secret room in her establishment, operates without a duenna, and possesses sufficient social independence to send a steward for money to offer the male ego narrator her gold jewelry, apparently in return for a sexual encounter, which will be the narrator's first. And I found Persis waiting for me in the chamber, and then I had my first experience of sexual intercourse, proton et peiraten synousias. When he refuses the jewelry, she offers him money instead, which appears to be accepted. The narrator seems to be being compensated for his deflowering, diakoreseos, by Persis. Susan Stephens and John Winkler rightly emphasize that we seem to have here another hero who occasionally succumbs to the importunings of a sexually experienced woman. Since it is evident in the text that the narrator was a virgin, we should assume that what is being ironically described here is condition of the man, not Persis. So there are no sexual relations in Greek novels for the men. There are only sexual transactions parallel. Hélène Morales is perfectly right when she says that Achilles exhibits a comic disregard for any pious laudation of chastity and virginity. And this statement could also be applied to Longus in a way. The male virginities, as both authors display, is preserved as far as Chloe and Lequipe are concerned. And while Daphne and Clitophon have experienced the very indeed mystery of sexuality, the deed in Greek novels is nothing but elliptic, metaphorical, and euphemistic. The experience is less sensual than economic. Their virginity, in a sense, is also preserved in itself because it coincides with a celebration of sensuality, which cannot portray their lapse with Lycaonion or Melite. To conclude this far too long presentation, I would appeal to someone who might well have understood the erotic agenda of Longus and Achilles' Statius. Heliodorus is likely to be the last member of the Big Five and not the less concerned with virginity. His Aethiopica is contemporaneous with the following of treatises about virginity in Christian circles at the 4th century CE. It is an exceptionally chaste text, and I quote Tim Whitmarsh here, displaying a conspicuous lack of eroticism. The heroine, Chariclea, embodies a sexual dissidence in the novel as she really embraces virginity as a choice of life, a style of life, a lofty form of existence, at the service of Artemis in Delphi. To the despair of her foster father, she has even made a god of virginity. And even when she falls in love with Theagenes, the two protagonists compete with each other in their display of commitment to the ideal of sexual continence, sophrosyne, and self-mastery. Michael has rightly pointed out that the Aethiopica is the only Greek novel when the male character is tasted as well as the heroine to establish his virginal condition. Ironically, both have to be virgins to be ritually sacrificed by the Ethiopians for the safety of the nation. Heliodorus has seen that something was rotten in his predecessors. He knows what lies behind the kiss and the embrace in Longus and Achilles' statues. It is a fake virginity. Daphnis enjoys the sweet pleasure of kissing, but longs for something he cannot name or conceive. For Clitophon, gazing and kissing are better than sex, but the mystery of penetration, so disappointing and unexceptional, is something he yearns for and is comically prevented from enjoying, at least until his encounter with Melite. Heliodorus has a solution for an authentic sensual virginity, a solution that the patriarch Photios illuminates in his presentation of the novel in his Bibliotheca. And this is the text too. Chariclea and Theagenes displays a desire, potos, which is a very erotic term, for chastity, a paradoxical, antithetical, and puzzling device that captures perfectly the new and last agenda for the Greek novel. This time, the sensuality will be truly virginal. Theagenes and Chariclea, in the text too, for once are alone in a cave with no one chaperoning them. They can embrace, they can kiss, as they hugged and kissed to their heart's content. Unlike Daphnis and Chloe, they know they are in love and they know the meaning of their sensual union. They know also what would naturally happen afterwards. Unlike Leucippe and Clitophon, who would have made love if they had the opportunity to do so, they do not enjoy the privilege of being able to cross the gap between sensuality and sexuality on their own. Their love, eros, is as pure as a maiden, parthenon. The love erotos they consummated was sinless, agnoantos, and undefiled, partheneontos. It's a eros parthenon. It's a really fascinating expression. Like Leucippe and Clitophon, they can fulfill their desire as they were making love, but through chaste kisses, kataros, philimacine. Here, the sensual virginity is chemically pure, and there will be no Lycaonian or Melite to obscure it. Thank you for your attention.